right, well, good morning. Welcome, Powerful Moments Encourage group this morning. We're glad you are here. I did see Dorothy out there. Becky, did you hear from Debbie and Dwight Holland this week? Okay, we'll ask her when she comes in. So, excuse me? Missing? Oh, Nona talked to him? Still bad. Hmm. No. Okay, so Debbie and Dwight Holland are still sick. Did they ever diagnose it as flu for sure? Flu and two different strands. Wow. Yeah. Well, so keep Donna in your prayers then. So, okay. I did see Terry Comet out there, and Becky, you were talking to her, weren't you? Were you out talking to Terry? No. I thought I saw her. Was I dreaming? Yeah, I saw. Yeah. So I know Sharon was talking to her, so I thought I saw somebody else talking to her to get an update on her. There's Dorothy. Dorothy, we just got an update on Debbie and Dwight. So not doing. Oh, Dwight's doing good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, good. Glad to hear that. All right. Well, tell them we're missing them. So, all right. Missing others this morning. I don't know if it's illness or what's going on today. So, anything else this morning? We got it? Okay. All right. Who would like to open us in prayer then this morning? All right. Don't everybody jump out at once. Jeff, do you mind opening us in prayer this morning? Amen. Okay. Well, I was going to start, and I think Nancy asked this question last week, so we're going to go back to the Easter lesson. I think it was her, and she's here. I saw her and Ken, but they're not in here. But anyway, we'll start with that. And she asked why Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man rather than specifically as the Son of God or God himself. So somebody responded, it might have been Becky, responded that it was because of a prophecy. It was due to prophecy. Somebody said that. I can't remember who said that. But, and that, as I looked into it, I think that is the correct answer. So why do I think that's the correct answer? Where is that prophecy then is the next question. So it is in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. So let's look at that for a second. It says, get it here. It says, I continued watching in the night visions, and I saw one like a son of man. Coming with the clouds of heaven, he approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. He was given authority to rule and glory and a kingdom so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. So prior to that verses, it talked about the Ancient of Days, which is God the Father. And in these verses, from reading them, you can see that it couldn't be anybody else, but the Son of Man couldn't be anybody else but Jesus the Son. So if you flip all the way over to Revelation, it's more prophecy to come. And in Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16, it says, I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me. When I turned, and I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was one like the Son of Man, dressed in a long robe with a gold sash wrapped around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, white as snow, and his eyes like a fiery flame. His feet were like fine bronze as it is fired in a furnace, and his voice like the sound of cascading waters. He had 7 stars in his right hand. A sharp, double-edged sword came from his mouth, and his face was shining like the sun at midday. So if you saw Alan Harden this morning, his face is shining too, like the midday. He was out the ball game all day yesterday and got sunburned really bad. But anyway, that's a separate story. But here, I think what's interesting is that here we see the Son of Man standing among the lampstands. He's standing among the light. The Son of Man is the light of the world, and that's where we see him. So the Jewish people, when he referred to himself as the Son of Man, if they knew Old Testament prophecy, Daniel, they would, and the Pharisees and the scribes would supposedly certainly know that. They would know to whom he was referring, that he was referring to himself as God, as the Son of God. Okay? So, with that, the questioner, and I'm not even sure whoever said it was prophecy, neither one are here today, so, but you now know, maybe. I think that's the answer anyway. Sound good? Ready to move on? So, all right, we're looking at then now Genesis chapter 31, verses 22 through 25. And the lesson title is Bullying or Sit on It. So 2 alternatives there. So if you recall back in Genesis chapter 30, 25 through 43, we studied this a couple of 3 weeks ago or so. It was Jacob's 6-year plan to enrich himself by negotiating with Laban to continue to shepherd Laban's flocks and to be allowed to keep the sheep and the goats that had rare or unusual, you might say, markings. So then in Genesis chapter 31, verses 1 through 21, we studied a little bit later, Jacob's escape from Laban. So Laban and his sons began to resent Jacob because of his wealth Jacob had accumulated. Jacob, we said, fled with his wives and children to return to the promised land, the land of his father Isaac in Canaan. So we've talked about the plan, we've talked about the escape, and today's lesson, we'll talk about Jacob facing a crisis as Laban and his posse, made up of his clan, of Laban's clan, pursues Jacob with the thought of having Jacob return to Paddan. That's the home of Laban. So Jacob, after living with a form, I would call it bullying, after living with a form of bullying by Laban for 20 years, and he now decides to break away. So bullying, as we see, has been around, obviously, since Old Testament times. So the worst form of bullying when I was growing up, have you ever heard of a swirly? Have I ever heard of that? That was kind of the worst form of bullying when I was growing up. Jill, do you know what that is? No, that's a wet willy, but no. Yeah. A swirly is where somebody, the bully, would stick the bullied his head in a toilet and flush the toilet. That was a story. So that was about the worst form of bullying back in those days. But today, with social media, bullying has gone to a whole new level, which can have very grave consequences, can result in teenagers or young people even taking their own lives, suicide. So here, there is a government website, by the way, www.stopbullying.gov, which is titled Prevention, Learn How to Identify Bullying and Stand Up to It Safely. So the website encourages one to, as it says, to become an upstander, So in today's lesson, we'll see where Jacob became an upstander to the bully Laban. Okay? So with that, Martha, if you would read Genesis chapter 31, verses 22 through 29. And this section I've titled Laban's Accusations. Laban's Accusations. So, Martha.
When Laban was informed on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. However, God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream of the night and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped in the hill country of Gilead. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy and with songs, with tambourine and with lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my grandchildren and my daughters? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob.'"
All right, thank you, Mark. So with that, what did Laban learn in Genesis 31:22, and then what did Laban do in Genesis 31:23? Yeah, he learned that Jacob had escaped. He had a 3-day lead on Laban now. And then in 23, what does Laban do in response? Got all his relatives, formed a posse, and he went after Jacob. So then he caught up to Jacob at Mount Gilead, and it took Laban a week to catch up with Jacob. So along the way, while tracking Jacob, God spoke to Laban in a dream. What did God communicate to Laban in the dream? What did God tell Laban? Do not speak to Jacob either good or bad. Some translations say, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad." Renderings in Hebrew of that verse says of what God said sounds something like, "Refrain from threatening Jacob with any harm, or take care not to contradict Jacob." We might translate it, God told Laban, "Watch your step, hands off of Jacob." So does Laban's dream remind you of any other times God had to step in to assist a patriarch? Yes, ma'am. Yep. 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 Abimelech. God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him not to harm Abraham, even though Abraham had deceived Abimelech with Sarah. And he also appeared to Isaac to extract him also from the Philistine ruler Abimelech as well. Appeared to him in a dream. So previously, both of those, God had to step in to, as such, save or provide safety for patriarchs. So Laban's dream confirms that God doesn't only speak to believers. Since he's speaking to Laban, Laban was not a believer. What message does God typically give unbelievers? Warnings? What kind of warnings? That was certainly a warning. Shape up, yeah, shape up. What other messages? revelation of who he is for a lot of believers, that particularly if God is speaking to them about repentance, right? He would speak revelation to them. Or sometimes God speaks rebuke to unbelievers as well. So we hear today of God speaking in dreams and visions, more specifically, or more broadly, I should say, more broadly to people in this Islamic countries where Bibles are not readily available, church is not readily available, so God uses more supernatural means to speak to unbelievers in those countries. So Genesis 31:25 tells us that both Jacob and Laban set up camp in the hill country of Gilead. So I can see them, that Jacob was on one hill and Laban was on the other hill with all his posse, and Jacob had all his family and sheep and goats and what have you on the other hill, and they were kind of facing each other there. So what did Laban accuse Jacob of in Genesis 31:26? Stealing his daughters. So Laban here tried to get the upper hand by taking the initiative and accusing Jacob of deception and taking his daughters, Jill said, stealing them, taking them as POWs in effect. So what do you think about Laban's accusations? Yeah. Yeah, so Jamie says she thinks the accusations by Laban are pretty lame, and that Jacob had already spent 14 years working for Laban's two daughters, Rachel and Leah, and now he worked 6 more years, agreed to a labor contract, to continue to watch Laban's flocks as such, in that labor contract for another 6 years. So here, though, I think Laban was trying to bully Jacob. Laban was using the old ploy that we even see today in politics. Laban was accusing Jacob of what Laban had done to Jacob. He is accusing Jacob of deception, whereas Laban had spent 20 years, and we'll see more about that shortly, in deceiving Jacob. So if you recall back, Jacob spoke to both Leah and Rachel, and they both agreed with him it was time to go. So they freely left with Jacob. So moving on in verses 27 and 28 of Genesis 31, why did Laban claim he should have been told of Jacob's departure? He gives 2 reasons. He was going to give them a party. He was going to send them off with this big parades, supposedly with singings and tambourines and lyre and so forth. And so he told Jacob he shouldn't have secretly left because he missed this opportunity to have this big parade as such when he left. And then secondly, he told him, what else did Laban not have the opportunity to do? Kiss his daughters and his grandkids. So he missed that opportunity. So those 2 reasons there that that Laban told Jacob that he should have told him that if he was leaving. So do you think Laban would have sent Jacob away with singing and music and a big parade? No, I don't think so either. So 20 years of Laban's deception and treatment of Jacob does not support, I don't think, that Laban would have sent him away with a big grand parade. So today we would say that Laban was trying to put a guilt trip on Jacob about leaving. So Laban was here, I think, trying to bully Jacob in kind of a passive-aggressive way as such. So Jacob, in Genesis 31:28, Laban told Jacob he had done foolishly. What do you think about Laban's statement that Jacob had done foolishly? Jamie says he's trying to intimidate him in that, go on. make him feel bad. So, yeah, intimidate him to feel bad. Maybe trying to scare him, Jan says. You think there's... Yeah, that Mark says that Laban's trying to basically tell him that he's more powerful, that he's the leader, and that Jacob is the field hand as such. You think there's any truth, though, in what Laban said to Jacob? Yeah, yeah. Kind of cowardly way to leave, wasn't it? Because he said he fled in the night, basically. He got away 3 days before Laban knew he was gone. So if he was really if Jacob was really fully trusting in God, do you think that would have been the way to leave? No. I think he would have gone to the bully Laban and said, you know, we're leaving. I fulfilled my work contract, and we're going home. So, or going to his home. So what did Laban boast of in Genesis 31:29? Yeah, Jan says he had the power to harm him, but he stopped because, why? God told him to. God spoke to him and told him, be careful, watch yourself, not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. So Laban was saying he could give Laban was saying to Jacob he could give him a swirly, but God warned him not to, right? So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So Jan says that in her study last night and reading this, that Laban was really still not talking nice to Jacob, that he wasn't following what God had told him. Why? Laban should have turned around and gone back. Yeah. He was fearful of God. We're going to talk about why a little bit later. But why, to Jan's point, why do you think that Laban's demeanor, let's call it, didn't change? He was still trying to be the bully, even after God spoke to him. Testing God? Jill, did you say so? He was an unbeliever. So what do unbelievers do? Do they follow what God tells them to do? They do their own thing. So he's an unbeliever, so to an extent he has some fear, but he's not totally, as an unbeliever, he's not totally doing what God told him to do. Okay? Good question, Jan. So how would you characterize Laban at the end of this section now? He was a bully. Yeah, that's what I wrote too. I think he sounds like a big airbag. Have you ever heard that term before? You know, he's spouting off a lot. But here, Laban had leverage over Jacob for 20 years, and now Laban's leverage as the bully is pretty much gone. So why is it gone? What's happened in the last 6 years? God continued to bless Jacob how? With the flocks, with the sheep and the goats, and he had some camels and servants and so forth. So Jacob had gotten very wealthy. So Laban no longer could control Jacob. So his leverage over Jacob was gone. So Laban knew that, but Laban, I think, was still trying to save face. Laban had seen how God had blessed Jacob and knew God spoke. Laban had seen how God blessed Jacob, and now God spoke directly to Laban. So Laban knew his ride on the Jacob gravy train was over. So he was still trying to hold on, but he couldn't. He knew it was ending. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Laban was losing a lot of power and wealth himself because, again, he recognized that a lot of his, if you remember back 14 or 20 years before, Laban wasn't wealthy. So over these 20 years, not only has Jacob over the last 6 years gotten wealthy, Laban has gotten very wealthy over this time too. So, and we see that he recognized that was because of Jacob and Jacob's relationship with God, and now he sees the gravy train pulling out of the station as such. It's leaving. So he is concerned about what's going to happen to him in the future in terms of his wealth building. All right, so let's read on. We just talked about in Genesis 31, 22 through 29, Laban's accusations. Let's look at Genesis 31, 30 through 32, and we'll hear Jacob's rebuttal. So Martha, if you'd read those verses.
Now you have indeed gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob replied to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, point out what is yours among my belongings, and take it for yourself. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them.
All right, so in looking at those verses, I believe Laban here makes a very interesting statement in verse 30 of Genesis 31 when Laban said, "Now you have indeed gone away because you long greatly for your father's house." Do you see anything interesting in this statement? Maybe, I'm not sure if it's paradoxical or not. I'm not sure that's the right word, but yeah, didn't think about that. Yeah, he's not accepting. Get out here in a second. He's saying that Jamie's saying that Laban's not accepting any blame. He just wants to go to his father's house, and that's part of what I think is interesting.
His father's house is different than Laban's house. His gods are, you put them in a sack.
What's that now with the bar?
Laban's gods you can put in a sack.
Oh, Laban's gods you can put in a sack, yeah. So, do you think Laban here is recognizing Jacob's father's house with a capital F or a small f father's house? You think he's recognizing capital F? Yeah, I think, yeah. I'm going with Debbie on this one, Mark. So. Oh, yeah. Debbie said that she thinks he's talking about his father Isaac's house. I think it's what Laban is trying to position this as. I think Jacob is beginning to grow spiritually. And I think he's beginning to think about the promised land. He's beginning to think about capital F, Father's house, God's house. But we'll see. He's not there yet. But he is growing spiritually. We would call it he's being sanctified, but it's taking a little time. So Laban went on to ask a question of Jacob there in verse 30 of 31. What's the question Laban asked Jacob? Why did you steal my gods? As Mark said, you could put them in a sack. So why did you steal my gods? So what really got Laban's goat here, I think, that his children and grandchildren were leaving? Was that really what he was upset about? What was he really upset about? His God. Somebody had stolen his idols, had stolen his God. So he was upset about that. So what do you think about Laban's concern for the idols? It's wicked, yeah. What's that? Had a wicked heart. What does this tell us? Where was Laban's heart? Or not with, yes, in those gods. It was not with the one true God. It was with these idols. So, although these idols were probably made with precious metals, precious stones, and so forth, they were probably very expensive and valuable property as such. So, rather than his concern for loss of relationships with his daughters and his grandchildren, he was concerned about, again, his wealth and losing some very valuable property that these idols represent.
Well, I think, too, that he really didn't understand why he took them, because he knew
He who?
Laban, because he knew Jacob worshipped one God. And I think he was thinking, why in the world would you want to take mine? You know? Are you going to worship them, or is it just for the value? Or, you know, if you have one true God, why are you taking mine?
Good question. Good question. So that leads us, we're going to get to the answer to that in just a minute. Keep that, that's a good question. Keep that in mind. So, what's that, Mark?
That's a great reason why you and Dick are wrong about the
You're not letting go, are you? He's trying to.
Come around by the end of the lesson.
Mark is trying to bully us, isn't he, Debbie? All right. So first, though, before we get there, Jacob responds to Laban's accusations in verses 31 and 32. So how did Jacob respond? He makes three responses. What are they? What did he first say? Jacob said he was afraid what? That he would take his daughters from him. And so if he told Laban he was leaving, Laban wouldn't allow Rachel and Leah to leave. And then secondly, he says what? That's when he says what? Yeah. So he says, Jacob says, I did not know that your idols had been taken. So Jacob here says he's innocent. He doesn't know anything about it, which we'll find out he doesn't. So if the idols were found, what was going to happen with that person? Death. They were going to execute that person. Then the third one, though, third response is, what's the third part of the response?
If you find it, take it.
If you find it, take it. But also he says, if there's any other property that was taken, it would be turned over to you. So I think it's interesting here or let me ask you, do you find anything interesting about this? If you find these idols, what's going to happen? But if you find other property, what's going to happen? You're going to give the other property back, but if you find the idols, you die. So here, I think it's interesting that the taking of the idols was a felony, but taking anything else was a misdemeanor, basically. So that, again, I think shows the value that Laban placed upon these idols. And we're going to get back here a little bit later as to why, Martha's question. So they had a lot of material value, these idols did, so this was grand theft larceny, basically, if you take these. So you face the penalty of death for that. So do you see anything disappointing in Jacob's response to Laban? Not honest in what way, Jill? Yeah. I think Jill's on to something. So I think here he professes fear that Laban would prevent him from taking his wives, Leah and Rachel. So instead of here trusting in God, he's, again, being fearful and running away, basically. Leaving in the dark of night, you might say. So Laban has, as we said earlier, still some growing to do spiritually, as we will see. But let's not be too hard on on Jacob, because we all have some growing to do spiritually, don't we? So we're all in the process as a believer in the process of sanctification. So let's read on here Genesis 31 through chapter 31, verses 33 through 35. This is the search. So we had Laban's accusations, then we had Jacob's rebuttal, and now we have the search. Martha, if you would.
So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 slave women, but he did not find them. Then he went out to Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddlebag, and she sat on them. So Laban searched through all the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "May my lord not be angry that I cannot stand in your presence because of the way women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household idols.
Okay, thank you, Barb. So where all did Laban search for his idols? All the tents. So whose tents? Jacob's, Leah's, the 2 slave women, and who? And Rachel's. Do you find anything interesting here that Laban, it appears, searched Leah's tent twice? Why would he do that? Not his favorite. So Laban may have thought she was the most likely suspect. You know, she may have been bullied by Laban to marry Jacob to begin with. We don't know how that relationship really was that came about. So anyway, she could have been, in Laban's mind, the most likely one to take him. So why do you think Rachel's tent was searched last then? Thought he would find them before he got to her. Why? Because she hung the moon. Because it appears that maybe Rachel was the least likely suspect, because maybe she was Laban's favorite as such. So I suspect during this search that Jacob was sitting on pins and needles while Rachel was sitting on the idols. Right? A little play on words there, intended. This is a very tense time for Jacob, because Jacob didn't know if anything had been stolen or not. He's unaware at this point of what's going on, so he could be pretty concerned. So how did Rachel get away with God napping? She sat on him. What did she tell Laban? Why she didn't get up to greet her father, which by custom she should have. What did she tell him? Verse 35, the manner of women is upon me. So she couldn't get up, supposedly. So she says, I can't stand up. I'm seated as such. And I wondered as I read this, is this where Alfred Fonzarelli got his phrase, sit on it, right? So this could have been it right here. So from the Happy Days TV show, right? So anyway, so I'm very impressed with Rachel's theft of the idols. Why would I be impressed with her theft? You don't know. Yeah. How far was Rachel living from her father, Laban? You remember? 3 days. It's a 3-day journey, so she was a pretty stealthy commando. So Mark would have had her on his team there back when he was special forces, because she evidently snuck over there 3 days away, stole these idols, and got back without being detected as such until later on. So pretty sneaky on her part, I think. So anyway, let's read on. Genesis 31, verses 36 through 42. Remember, we talked about Laban's accusations, Jacob's rebuttal. We just talked about the search. And now we're going to see Laban's dressing down, Laban being dressed down as such. So, Martha, if you would read 36 through 42.
Then Jacob became angry and argued with Laban. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Though you have searched through all my property, what have you found of all your household property? Set it here in front of my relatives and your relatives, so that they may decide between the two of us. For these 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flock. I did not even bring to you that which was torn by wild animals. I took the loss myself. You demanded it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. This is how I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. For these 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night."
Okay, so Laban searched but couldn't find the idols. So there in Genesis 31:36, after no stolen property was discovered, what was Jacob's reaction to Laban's accusations that Laban's property had been stolen? He was angry. I would go as far as say, he exploded. He gives Laban a pretty good dressing down here. He goes off on a tirade as such, Jacob does. So Jacob was incensed and stood up here. We see him standing up here to the bully Laban. So Jacob, over these 20 years, now it took him 20 years, but he's reached his breaking point as such. What's that, Jane? Yeah, it's probably been building up, yeah. So he had a long time for this to build up, but finally he explodes and lets Laban have it with both barrels as
And
such.
this is one time Laban was right.
Yeah, it's one time Laban was right, but Jacob didn't know it. So we'll see later he finds it out some chapters later. But yes, at this point he didn't know it. So Jacob reverses the tables here on Laban and brought charges against Laban as such. So Jacob, who'd somewhat, I would say, been a nandy-pamby, if you know what that is. So here he was kind of, what is it, who is it, Milquetoast? What's the first name of that? What's that? Isn't it somebody? Just Milquetoast. It isn't a first name. I thought it was Herbert Milquetoast or somebody. But anyway, he was just a milquetoast kind of guy to this point. But now he goes off on Laban. So as Jan said, it took him finally 20 years to stand up to the bully, but he does it. So in 31:37, Jacob goes on to ask a rhetorical question. Though you have searched through all my property, what have you found of all your household property? So he asks that rhetorical question. And then in 38-41, Jacob details the hardships and afflictions he endured in his relationship with Laban. So what's some of the hardships and the afflictions that Jacob presents to Laban here? He worked through hot and cold, yeah. What else? He didn't sleep. He lost a lot of sleep. He didn't sleep, yeah. Yeah, Jacob suffered the loss for whatever was eaten by wild animals or whatever was stolen by renegades or whomever. He took the loss instead of Laban taking the loss. What else? Changed his wages 10 times. So we talked about in a lesson or so ago that more than likely there had been 14 birthings in the flock, and almost every time Jacob's wages had been changed. What else? How long did he work for Leah and Rachel? 14. He worked 14 years to be able to marry Leah and Rachel, and then he worked another, how many years on top of that? 6 more years. So, and then he also told Laban that he had to provide his own food, that Laban didn't even, feed his workers as such. So he had to provide his own food. So Jacob lays it out here for Laban of all the afflictions and sufferings that he went through. So how was Jacob able to endure this hardship and affliction? What? God. And he says there in Genesis 31 and 42, Jacob tells Laban that the God of his father, the God of Abraham, was for him, and the fear of Isaac. So how is our facing hardship different from how Jacob faced hardship? Mark's given up on his position, by the way, so. What's that, Jan? We don't let it build up for 20 years. Yeah. How is our facing hardship different from how Jacob faced hardship? Shouldn't be, that's right. Should not be different than how Jacob faced hardship. Jacob turned to God who was for him, who was for Jacob. God is also for us, and we can turn to him. I have on my phone, it's a notes. Do y'all have a notes app on your phone, by the way? Yes. Everybody have that? That's just common stuff. Jill, do you on your flip phone you don't have? Yeah, it's a notes app on there, and in my notes app, I have a folder that's called Bible, and in that folder Bible, I put verses that are speaking significantly to me, and a lot of them are about hardship that are in there, but there are others too. When I'm reading, studying, if a verse really stands out, I'll put it in the notes app, and every so often I will go through there and read them. What's that, Jill? Mm-hmm. Laban was Laban was, yeah, Jacob, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Jill is asking if Laban was Jacob's uncle, why would he be so difficult and treat Jacob as he did? So what's the answer to that? Not a believer.
He's selfish.
He's selfish. Jan says that family still does it today. Is anything different about this family doing it today than they did to Jacob and Laban? Yeah, watch Dallas. Yeah, Becky said. That's a perfect example, yeah. That's a good question, Jill. Yeah.
I think she was more concerned about his getting married.
He's concerned about his getting married, and why did she send him away to begin with? What was going to happen? Esau was going to kill him, so she was concerned about that too. Yeah. Yeah, within the family. Yeah. As a what? As a bully. Yeah.
He was providing for them in his city.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying from his perspective.
Yeah.
I think he feels like he was had.
Yeah. Jabin. Jeff. Jeff makes a good comment about Laban. I wonder about that. Jeff says that he thinks Laban did not see himself as a bully. Do you think bullies see themselves as bullies? No, I don't. For the most part, I don't think they do. Yeah. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
had taken care of him.
He's taken care.
he
I
first
think
got
that's a
there.
good word. He felt entitled, taking care of him, and he, in Jeff, a bully's mind, to his point, he probably did think he'd treated Jacob fairly. But I've lost the train of thought. Back to Jill's question. Oh, about family and why he went there. As Jeff said, I think it was maybe the best of the two alternatives. That Rebekah saw what had happened with Esau, and we'll really get into that in a few weeks, months, about what happened to Esau and who he married, and that wasn't a good alternative. So the other alternative was send him back to her family in Laban. Although I think she probably had some insight into kind of guy Laban was, but it was better of the two alternatives. So, good question, Jill. So, why Jacob did fled? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she got him before they left. I don't think Jacob knew about it till later on, but yeah. But I still think that who had told Jacob to leave? God. So I think he still, if he was really totally faithful, he would have had faith that I should go tell Laban, God will protect me, God will provide. Now,
What-
as a human, will we do that? Yeah. He didn't tell him, but again, he didn't specifically tell him, but I just think God, I think Jacob, the right thing to do. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
This is just a dysfunctional family.
It is a
Because
dysfunctional family.
Rebekah was deceitful.
Yeah.
Laban was deceitful. Jacob was deceitful.
Yeah.
So, and Rachel was. I mean, it was in the genes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was. You think about it,
Yeah.
and
Good point.
the whole family was a mess.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. He did, back to Jeff's point, Jacob did do what God told him. But I don't know that, does God always tell us, all right, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it? Sometimes I think we got to do what God tells us, obviously, but we got to also know God would want us to do. I don't know. But again, that's just me. But so again, Jeff's right. He did exactly what God told him, but he maybe missed an opportunity. And we'll talk about the opportunity missed a little bit later too. So, all right. we got just a few minutes left. So I'm back to my notes app. How'd y'all get me off my notes app anyway? So I was going to tell you just some of the verses in there, read some of the few of the verses in there that I have in my notes app. And again, I encourage you to use your notes app for that if you're not. So you carry that phone all the time. There it is. So use it for your grocery list. Now you can use it for your Bible verses too. So some of the ones I've got, the first one on there is 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And then there's 1 Peter 5:10. It says, after you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. And then Isaiah 58:11 says, and the Lord will continually guide you and satisfy your desire in scorched places, and give strength to your bones, and you will be like a water garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Then Martha, if you would read Psalm 103, verses 2 through 5.
Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion, who satisfies your desires with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles.
And then the last one, Isaiah 40:31 says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. So it's interesting that the newer Bible translations, such as the NIV, the ESV, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, capitalize the word fear. When we read it back there, the fear of Isaac, NASB does not, but a lot of translations do. Why do they capitalize the F in fear? Jan? Isaac represents the promise of God. Maybe, as Jan says, to emphasize the word fear. What's the word right before fear? That little word, the. That little word, the, I think it's because of that little word. The only use of this term, the fear of Isaac, is 2 times in this chapter, Genesis 31. And I think about Isaac when he went up Mount Moriah. What was going to happen to him up there? He was going to be sacrificed. Yeah, that's what he thought. And so I think he was I would be pretty fearful about that. And I think he would probably terrified. So the fear, I think, is a reference here to the holy awesomeness, the fear of God. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 through 13 commands, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, love him, and serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and keep the Lord's commandments and his statutes, which I'm commanding you today for your good. So I think Isaac, if you think back to his potential sacrifice, that he is a representation of the fearfulness in terms of awesomeness of God. So I think here again that Jacob has heard these stories. He had heard what his dad Isaac, what had happened to him, and I'm sure it was a story well told that Jacob realized very prominently what that meant, the fear of Isaac, the awesomeness of God. But also it represents what happened to Isaac. Did he get sacrificed? No. God redeemed him God saved him. So the fear of the Lord results in redemption, results in salvation. So, all right, we're going to stop there, and we'll hopefully finish next week this lesson and move forward in Genesis. We're going to get through Genesis 36 eventually before we go back to the New Testament. So we'll pick up right there next week with the next question. As we discussed, fear, capital F, is a reference to God. Why does Jacob say, "in the fear of Isaac"? I think we just answered that. But we'll go back and review that as well. So thank you for being here. Y'all have a blessed week.